Deborah Lucas O'Fury was the head of reference, interlibrary loan, and instruction at DeUville University in Buffalo, New York from 2002 to 2022. She is the author of Marketing the 21st Century Library, The Time Is Now, published by Elsevier in 2015. She has also published academic journal articles in Collaborative Librarianship, the Journal of Interlibrary Loan, Document Delivery and Electronic Reserve, the Journal of Library and Information Science, and Library Leadership and Management. She has co-authored and published articles in the nursing and pharmaceutical field. Her book chapters appear in Middle Management in Academic and Public Libraries and the 21st Century Handbook of Anthropology. Additionally, she has served as the editor for the Journal of Library Innovation. For fun, she crafted and published encyclopedia articles in the Encyclopedia of Power, the Encyclopedia of Time, the Encyclopedia of Anthropology, and the 20th Century Encyclopedia of Pop Culture. Deborah has been teaching online library science classes for over 12 years and has worked with such prestigious organizations as RUSA and ALA and Library Use Academy. She has also run seminars with information and library science organizations in Florida and Montreal. Because of Deborah's vast knowledge in the history, present, and future of libraries, her widely published literature is highly regarded, studied, and cited across the world. Through her teaching and writing, she has been able to impact students and scholars not only in the United States, but across the globe, including countries in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, South Africa, Canada, and the Caribbean. Before her retirement from DeUville, she was appointed Faculty Senate Parliamentarian in 2018 and to 2022. She was awarded a sabbatical and faculty research grant in 2014, a fellowship award from 2015 to 2016, and then promoted to full librarian academic rank in 2016. Her retirement has created the synergy she needed to educate the masses and to successfully drive our profession into the future. Deborah, take it away.
Thank you. Everyone can hear me okay? I want to make sure that's working properly. And I am going to start with my screen share. Oh, my host is disabled, my participant screen share.
Sorry about that, I just changed it.
Okay. And I will just one moment. Okay. I apologize for that little snafu there. Let's see, let's start here at the very beginning. Oh, I apologize, it's not working right for me. There we go. Now, I have started with you some conversations about interlibrary loan and the current state of affairs that we are experiencing and the rapid changes, especially in the electronic versions of our work, the things that we need to do to share that information. This slide here gives you my contact information. I do have a website called newlibrarian.org. It lists all the classes that I teach. In the event that anybody there would want to see more about what offerings there are, customization is available. Okay. In today's session, we will talk about definitions because there's a lot of jargon that we use, not just with within our organization, within the staff operations, but we use jargon unnecessarily with our patrons. And they don't necessarily understand what we're saying to them. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to speak to our patrons in common language. One thing I've seen over the past is a series of definitions and explanations that our patrons don't necessarily need to know about. They don't need to know that it goes and is sent out to 5 lenders and that there's 5 waiting days in between each potentially. They don't need to know anything really about the process on our end. All they need to know is that we will get them what they need. In order to start the process, we need to understand the past and histories that have evolved. And we're going to go back to the early 1900s. We'll talk about the present situations. As I mentioned, we do have issues with electronic sharing. And that's a present situation that we are in control of. We need to, as a profession, step up and reason, and we need to negotiate with our vendors. We'll talk more about that as well. And that ties into our future predictions and what we think is going to happen, and what we want to happen, not what we're told will happen. There's some benefits and risks to all of our management systems, our operations internally and externally, and that's where procedures and staff management come into play. We're not going to cover all of this today, but we will cover as much as possible. Our learning goals to understand the key concepts of ILL, the infrastructures and the operations. And I know that many people out there in the field of interlibrary loan, not just communally, not just people who have signed up here, people nationally are talking about things like copyright compliances and software hardware needed for efficient operations. There's been research and discussion on COVID and how it will affect ILL, how it has affected ILL, how it may continue to affect ILL, and its continuation we're not really sure about at this time. But as I mentioned, it's up to us as a profession to drive our own future. Our learning goals also is to develop points for creating and enforcing sound borrowing and lending policies. It's a lot of different libraries, different missions. They have different goals. They have different staffing. So the enforcement of sound borrowing and lending procedures is something that will naturally vary from library to library. There is no cookie cutter, but there is a definite demand and need for us to sit and talk about what we want to accomplish. So we want to also be able to enhance our opportunities again at our own institutions, and we need to develop staff training and mentoring. When I was working in interlibrary loan at Duval University, I often would have librarians and clerks work in the department processing requests. Our clerk mainly did everything. After we trained her, she was very the ones we had several clerks and interns, but we need to develop that training with them. And the mentoring part. And one important learning goal is that, and I've learned this throughout the years of teaching interlibrary loan, we need to also understand that it's not a one-stop shop in our interlibrary loan services. So what I mean to say is that in that one-stop shop, we don't want only one librarian or only one clerk giving up on a request. We're going to talk a lot about that. And I firmly believe that if a patron submits a request that is incomplete, that we on our end do as much research as possible. We may go back to the patron if we need to for more information, but really we should be developing our staff so that they can handle those types of situations. If one librarian or clerk cannot find that piece of information, the bibliographic information or the article or the book, it has to be passed on to somebody else. In general, I think the best staffing is to have a librarian in charge and to have multiple people down and helping in the trenches, clerks and librarians being involved. Okay, interlibrary loan is a process, right? And it has a history, and let's talk about that a little bit. Interlibrary loan is a service where patrons will receive books and articles and circulating materials from surrounding libraries in the community, like we do here at Winnie Lurk and throughout New York State with our consortium. Most libraries, but not all, are both net lenders and lenders and borrowers. Some libraries only borrow and they do not lend from their collection. Some lenders will lend more than they will borrow. And you can think about a community college where their students really can find what they need in a community college, a 2-year college, whereas a university student might have a harder time, but that 2-year college might have it. Net borrowers borrow more than they lend, and net lenders lend more than they borrow. And that's one way to keep it straight in our minds. The U.S. Interlibrary Loan Code, as history, was first published in 1916, adopted by the American Library Association in 1917. It's designed to provide a code of behavior or ethics for requesting and supplying materials within the United States. So other countries can be familiar with our interlibrary loan code, but they don't necessarily have to follow it. And as a point of reference, there are no police for interlibrary loan. We're not on, it's an honor system basically, but this code of interlibrary loan will help guide us towards policies and procedures that we should be employing in our departments. This code is intended to be adopted voluntarily. Okay. Supplying libraries may suspend service to requesting libraries that fail to comply with their code. An example of that is books that repeatedly come in late from other schools. Supplying libraries may suspend for materials that come back damaged. If they're allowed out of the building and they are supposed to be remained in the building only for your patron, those kinds of provisions in the code should be followed. I have a question here, right? We need to think about interlibrary loan as a lend from library to library. But that library we lend to is in fact our patron. We don't lend to a patron of another library, we lend to the library, and then the library we lend to becomes responsible for the follow-up and the transitions. Now, some of the milestones, ALA formalized its code again in 1917, and the most current form is available online. And let's take a look at that. This is a PDF. And now I need to do a new share. Okay, now this is the interlibrary loan request form. Some of them are now fillable. This one is fillable. And I don't know why looks like I have half of this page showing that, or it's just condensed. It's a little strange looking, but this includes all the information. This is one of the original forms. They have made it fillable, which is great now. So you can just type the information in. A lot of libraries will ask for shipping and they want it to be shipped by a specific method. They oftentimes will want tracking. Some libraries use the blue bags in New York State, which is a nice way to ship for a lower cost. Other libraries want it sent registered mail so that you can prove that it has been received and that it's been returned. Now, here it says there's restrictions, right? In library use only, copying is not permitted. Those are restrictions that you can put on your loans. There are sometimes no renewals, and you'll see that when it comes in. Usually it should be prominent on that book that there are no renewals allowed. One of my favorite pet peeves is this not supplied due to. It's in use. That might be a reason why we can't supply it, right? Maybe it's not on the shelf and we can't find it. Okay, or we find out that it's in poor condition and then we don't want to send that one out, not supplied. Another reason is that it might be at the bindery. So if somebody wants a journal article and they can't get it electronically because of an embargo, perhaps, and we have shipped our items out to the bindery, that's another reason to say no. Not found as cited. I don't know if you can all see where I've checked. That is my biggest pet peeve, okay? If it's not found as cited, we as librarians maybe need to put a little more investigation into that item. Sometimes the citations are incorrect. I've seen theses, I've seen books where students go, I can't find this article, and it's because the citation information is incorrect. Now, there's two things you can do. You can go back to the lender and say, hey, can you help us further this citation? But the not found as cited really should never leave your desk. It should never leave your organization to go out into the big wide world. It is the responsibility of the borrowing library to say, hey, this is the best we can do. And sometimes other libraries will go above and beyond and double check, maybe pull that journal off the shelf and take a look at it to see if in fact the citation is usable as it was submitted. Another important reason to say no on this form is policy or license. Another pet peeve for me. What is the policy that we're not sending this item out? Now, there could be a number of internal policies that aren't listed here, but I can't think of anything else to say no to a lend or a borrow if I think they're all listed. I can't see what kind of policy or license issues could come up. Well, I can, and I'll show you information about that. If the charge exceeds the limit, just ask the library if, as a conditional, two choices. You just say no and it goes to the next lender. That's an option. Or you can go back to the library as a conditional and say it's $50, not $25. And you know that we all have our max cost listed in our policies directories so that people know. But some libraries will do a conditional and say, hey, will you spend extra money on this? This also speaks to lacking volume and issue, non-circulating, and in process on order. Now, first of all, the non-circulating should be in your catalog that it's uncirculating. If it's a reference book, it might be a reference book someplace else. It might not also circulate. If it doesn't circulate, you can ask for a book chapter, ask for the table of contents, and then present that to your lender or your patrons so that they can make the decision on what they might want most out of that non-circulating item. Are there any questions about the form? It's pretty simple. If you use the Possum, use Iliad, you use WorldShare, use Dockline, whatever you're using to do this process, you will be able to follow the format we're looking at now. I believe that if you want a loan and you only have the title and the author, then you should have enough information to fill that request. Now, however, let me tell you from my own experience at the university, I had a professor who was very particular about what edition she wanted. Our clerks and librarians sometimes in their experience would assume that the professor wants the most current edition. But if people are very specific about their edition, you can follow up with them to say, hey, do you really want this before you send it out? All of our requests for that particular faculty member were being sent out incorrectly, and it caused a lot of dissatisfaction with the surveys or with the services that we provide. Okay, I'm going to go on. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Oh, there's a specific one for the Winnie Alert Code of Conduct. That's perfect. I know that in some cases, well, in most cases, in the code, it says that we are supposed to have that book returned to the lending library by the date that they have issued it to. So the patron isn't supposed to drop off that book the day it's due. The patron should be dropping it off a couple of days prior to allow for shipping. We can take a look at the Winnie Alert Code of Conduct, maybe closer to our break, so that I can get in more material. I don't want to miss out. Okay, now that is a document. Let me stop share. I apologize. I might have just got a slow connection. Okay, here we are again. And I'm going to screen share. Okay, here we go. Back to our presentation. Although paper forms have not kept up with modernization, the information has relatively remained, at least similar. But now that we can do the filling in, the auto population, it does modernize the form a little bit more. But one of the modernizations that come to mind for me is that we do say no and refuse requests for things that we might not have to say no to anymore. And one of them is licensing. Just because it's an electronic article in your database does not mean you can't send it. You can send it. It really depends on your contract with the vendor. And those contracts are negotiable, and those contracts should be negotiated every single time it comes up. I'll show you an example in just a few seconds. Let's take a look at my next link here. It's opening. Okay, this is the Interlibrary Loan Code for the United States. There is a downloadable ILL code with supplement, and then the ILL request form. So the one that Caitlin referred to is what we do locally when we do our interlibrary loans, because we're more of a, we're closer together in logistically. So we can share those books more quickly. And as a practice, I always went to the most local libraries first, And then if I have to go national, we go national. There are cases when you're doing your interlibrary loan for journal articles, right? And I had librarians who, I've talked to librarians who, if they are on the East Coast and it's 4 o'clock at night, they might request that article from a library in West Coast because they're still operating at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They've got the 3-4 more hours of work to do for the day. And they might be able to get that article for us like right away. And then instead of waiting until the next day, the following day to get that article, we've just done the best possible job we can do for our patrons, and that's to get them the information as soon as possible. Now, I know that I come from an academic library, but there are other libraries who need to follow the same kind of processes because maybe you're working in a law library and it's critical for the attorney for trial. Maybe you work for a healthcare library, a hospital, or a healthcare institution of higher education. And maybe they need that information, you know, immediately to help treat a patient. So what we really want to do is ensure that speed of delivery. Now, this is Interlibrary Loan Code for the United States. Let's take a look at the code and supplement. And I will. Okay, can we all see that code up at the very top? Okay. This was prepared by the Interlibrary Loan Committee from RUSA in 1994. It was revised in 2001, and then approved finally by the board in January of 2016. And at the top, you'll see that downloadable ALA form. A lot of smaller libraries will use that kind of form because they don't have a processing system. And then maybe they send that out electronically to other libraries in their area to say, hey, can you fill this paper request for me? But what I wanted to really kind of focus on are a couple of areas within here. This code establishes the principles that facilitate the requesting of materials by a library, okay? And there's an explanatory supplement. It says, again, first published in 1916, adopted in 1917, is designed to provide a code of behavior for requesting and supplying materials. Okay, it's not enforced, as I've said, by an oversight body, except for the codes that we come up with. I mean, those are the policies that we should be following internally. Another area that I wanted to show you is 3.2 here on the code. United States libraries are encouraged to engage in the library loan from other countries. Ooh, how many of us do that? Anybody want to put in the chat if they're lending electronically? I'm sure electronically or physical books, I'm sure we all would be interested in knowing. If we have any international librarians here or international lenders, just pop a quick message in the chat with your name and the school. We'd love to know. I've worked with a lot of librarians in classes who do lend internationally. In addition to that, I've had a large number of librarians from other countries join into those RUSA classes that I teach. So we get that sort of overall look at international interlibrary loan lending. Now, in some cases, you will find that the lend from the International Federation of Library Associations, IFLA, which I just joined, IFLA, they will lend out electronically articles because they can just send that email or through usually email. And so they can do that. International codes for shipping books, we all know, especially being from the Buffalo area, it's even hard to get a book into Canada. These kinds of lens have their own code. And these kinds of lens take longer to ship. So we have to give them a longer period of time to use that resource, that book that has to be returned. I mean, they'll send out maps, they'll send out guidebooks, they'll send out, you know, sometimes more rare items. And if it's a rare item and a library says they're not going to ship it, ask them for a reproduction of it. Towards the bottom, it says, although the US shares a common border with Canada and Mexico, it's important to remember these countries have their own library infrastructures and practices, as I mentioned. So IFLA is a good body to become involved with if you are interested in sharing between borders. We've got some chat. St. John Fisher and Binghamton, how nice. Any comment about your experience at St. John Fisher? Do you lend books or do you lend only journal articles? Same with Binghamton. It's interesting, we have a state, is Binghamton state or is that a private school? And I wonder if there's differences between the, say the SUNY structure and the private university structure. Okay, your state of Binghamton, okay, okay. Yeah, issues with customs from St. John Fisher. So Jennifer, you handle the headaches, the heartaches of dealing with this, with issues with customs. Does it take longer to ship? And do you ship around the globe or just maybe to Canada? Electronic media, yes. The electronic media. It's interesting when you are requesting an item that you know is a journal article. I often through OCLC or through Iliad or Tapasa, whatever search structure you use, I will actually go and look for a library that has the electronic collection for that resource. This way I know that they can send that to us more readily. I'm interested. You had to contact schools. Oh, and then customs. Boy, oh boy. Jennifer, how long is your loan period if you do international? Okay, Jen. Oh, there you go. 2 months. I have also wondered if we're giving a 2-month time period to an international library, then how long is the loan period for our own patrons? And I think that's something that could be considered, so that we're serving our clients, our own patrons locally in the region, that maybe they also get 2 months. It's important to note that. Not all libraries are the same, so you can make your own decisions, but make them wisely and make them in coordination perhaps with a group like IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. They really do a lot of international research. They publish a journal that comes out, I think, once a year. It's quite substantial. Okay. I also have just to point out to you a couple more things about this guide. It says, describe completely and accurately the requested material looking for accepted bibliographic practices. Now, it says a good bibliographic description is the best assurance that the user will receive the item requested quick, requested accurately, but they don't always do that, and they don't know what the term bibliographic information even means. So when you tell them, I need more bibliographic information, they're going to scratch their head and they might just give up because they don't understand what they need to do. It's our job as librarians to do all that detective work for them and then go back after we've done our due diligence. I always wanted at least 2 librarians to look at a request before it got bounced back. We're going to look at Google Scholar, but there were some requests placed with a library for popular information. It had a citation, but the clerk could not find it on Google Scholar, and then just said no to the faculty member. And in which case, because they were popular items like newspaper articles from the 1940s, I think it wasn't in Google Scholar where we go to verify our citations. So she said no to a request that could have been filled, thereby upsetting the professor for having to wait longer than they really needed to. And then they got the bounce back message that said, we're not going to fill it. And that's why some libraries will adopt that formal procedure of, if you can't find it, then you need to give it to another person to review. And it's amazing how our search strategies are so different. Okay, now we have to comply, number 4.8, with the copyright law. The requesting library was responsible for complying with the copyright law, Title 17 in particular. Okay. Fair use, reproduction by libraries, and then the Cantu guidelines. We'll talk more about them. They're important. The Cantu guidelines are really important. But as we mentioned, there are no police. So it's really a matter of us following the rules that we know exist. Here's an interesting note that I found a lot of people didn't know about before they were given this information in classes that I've instructed. Renewals. When the supplying library denies a request, the materials should be returned by the due date or as quickly as possible if the renewal is denied. Now, if the library does not get back to you to say yes or no to that renewal request, you can assume that it's been granted, and you can see that in number 4.13, 4.13. If the supplying library does not respond, the requesting library may assume the renewal has been granted and then extend the due date by the same length as the original loan. I mean, these are the policies that we should be following as a code. As I mentioned too, up at the top, it talks about due dates and its restrictions. We need to get the book back from our patrons a couple of days before, so we can get it shipped back to the library in time. Now, how many people actually follow that code? I don't really know. I would suspect very few. It was something that I think I learned from the Western New York Library Resources Council, their code. So when I read their code, I go, gee, we probably should be following that code. But what happens when you follow that is that your patron might not get 4 weeks, they might only get 3 weeks. And that again is not a cookie cutter. This is a code that we hope the librarians follow. But if you, we don't want to return our books late to the lending library, right? But I'm thinking a lot of us do. I don't know if anybody wants to chime into the chat, because I'd be interested in knowing what people here are doing. So you can read that. The attachments have been sent to you. If anybody wants a specific attachment that you remember, or maybe you saw something and you don't remember exactly what it was, as good librarians, we can figure it out together. And then we can get you what you need if it wasn't provided as a handout. And you'll see it goes on. Oh, responsibilities of the supplying library. Of course, confidentiality of the user, right? So everything you need to know really is in this document. Again, called the Interlibrary Loan Code for the United States. Oh, there's a chat. Yeah, we generally send out reminders to borrowers in May on K-12. We have sometimes experienced that with faculty, because the faculty at some institutions can borrow for the whole semester. And then at the end of the semester, they get that reminder to return their books. Okay. Now I'm going to go back. New screen share. Okay, and this is the presentation where we left off. Oh, there's another chat. That code about renewing an item when we've gotten, oops. Let's go back. Yeah, the code about renewing an item. I began following that a long time ago. And it's interesting because I found that so many librarians are not familiar with that. When I do the classes, I'll ask, what did you learn from that code when you read that you didn't know before? And then there's another comment that we request the book be returned at least a week. I work in a law library and attorneys are very late in returning things. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And they're also demanding about getting them as quickly as possible because that's the nature of their business. Thank you for those comments. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, the ILL code was supplement from 2016. And then the fillable PDF request forms, we've looked at both of them. I like to have a separate, so you can see from the explanatory supplement, you can get to those links quickly again. And remember, the ILL code was supplement 2016, and then finally approved in 2017 by ALA RUSA. Okay. So I mentioned a little bit about some of our basic requirements just in conversation with you. But for ILL to function, we really need to share bibliographic information between libraries nationwide and worldwide. And what that means really is keeping your OCLC records up to date. Say you're reading a number of books and you've not updated OCLC. Now you're going to have a ton of libraries asking you for books that you don't own anymore because we didn't run through and do that automatic update and get those bibliographic records straightened out. It's so important to have the accurate information. It only slows down the process. Lending goes through 5 libraries. You can do more nowadays. I still stick with 5 because if I can't get that book or that item within those 5 libraries, then I have a feeling that maybe the bibliographic information might be really out of whack. Maybe they'll tell me that it's non-circulating all 5 times. I don't want to wait for 10 libraries to give me that information before it comes back. I want to know that sooner so I can get that information to my patron. We can find reliable, safe, and affordable transportation for returnables. And that speaks again to what the borrower really says they want, or the lender says they want. If they want it sent through the Blue Books, the SUNY schools and local area colleges, That's one way. Another way is UPS, as I mentioned, they've got the tracking numbers. Some of them just want those articles or book chapters sent electronically on the internet, either via email perhaps to you, or through one of your management systems like Iliad and Tapasa. Yeah. We need to be responsible for and guarantee also that the electronic delivery and the copyright compliance, compensation, is all possible within those regulations. Cantu is a guideline, and we'll talk more about Cantu in a few minutes. We can negotiate reciprocity for free lending. One of those reciprocity organizations or services is called LVIS, LVIS. I know some libraries are very cautious about joining such a large organization. Hundreds of libraries nationwide are lending for free. And if you've not signed up with them, I would do that like immediately. There's links in the guides, presentations, but it's LVIS, LVIS, and then you just sign up, you sign a contract, and then you're good to go. So how do we make it all happen? Okay, oh, there's a Q&A. Oh, how do you do OCLC updates? That's a really great question. And that happens in your cataloging department. And they can run all that metadata through. I think they can do it in a batch. So what you would do is you would pull together everything that you've discarded or weeded out and then run that through in the same way that you run it through when you add it. It's just an opposite process. But for really accurate information, the best answer is going to come from your catalogers. Did that answer your question? Okay, I'm going to keep going. You can always chime in again. Users make borrowing requests from their home library for an item that their home library doesn't own. Now, the home library is responsible for finding the libraries who own it, okay, and request it. And the patron does not need to be involved in any part of the librarian's process. The patron needs to be educated on how to fill out the forms, get them to you in time, and then understand your policies that they need to follow. I'm thinking about writing inside of a book and how it drives librarians crazy. And I've actually had conversations with people about erasing the writing if it's in pencil. And I thought that was kind of a crazy thought. Annotated books are great. I tell students who are in college that it's great to buy a used book because somebody has already done the annotation for you. But I always tell everybody, do not write in library books because it belongs to the library and not to themselves. Okay, Gary has a question, and Gary says we have 4 regions. One region is updated each quarter throughout the year to keep bibliographic information up to date. That's wonderful, Gary. It's so important. You're going to get requests. It's just going to eat up your time to say, oh, now you check the catalog. If it's still in your catalog, it might be still in your catalog. And then you got to go and look on the shelf, and you look on the shelf and the book's not there. And then you got to go back to your computer and say, I can't send that book. And it's just something that you can alleviate if you like do a quarterly update. Perfect. Oh, you no longer have catalogers? What do you do? Oh, do you outsource that cataloging function? If you're outsourcing your cataloging function to another company, I'm wondering, because that's something I don't know, who would be in charge of that, if that would be your vendor or say a serials person inside the library, But I can certainly find some answers for you to some of these questions. So I'm gonna write that down.
I can also save the chat.
Oh, good, we'll save the chat too.
Yeah,
And some of them are Q&A also.
okay.
I'll see what I can find out, and then we can talk about that more in our next session next week. Okay. Onward. I've been talking about some terms that maybe I should have maybe described a little bit more, but we do have returnables, right? Books, audio, visual, if you lend them, maps, if you lend them, photographs, again, if you lend them. Anything along those lines have to be sent back to the lending library. Sometimes strange items will go out, and it's interesting how many libraries, again, loan internationally and what they loan. I know some libraries lend out skeletal models from healthcare libraries. So if you're in a medical library, they might, I don't actually know how they logistically do that. Maybe they send out the whole box. There's parts and pieces inside. That's an internal policy, how many you have, how much they cost, how often your own patrons check them out. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Your non-returnables would be your articles, journal articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles, book chapters, perhaps, anything that the library patron can keep. When it comes to your e-texts, your books and your journal articles, you are allowed to photocopy or download one book chapter from an electronic book and ship that off to your other library, or your journal articles. And again, those, if they're electronic, can also be shipped out to a lender. Now, those rules, I've been told, are different in Canada. So if you're in Canada, you might not be able to email journal articles. But when I was in that class talking to those international students, I strongly urged everybody to go through your contracts. See what your contracts say about what you can lend and what you can't lend. You're requesting items, right? And you're requesting a returnable. I always go in system first. It's faster if you loan between libraries who are close together. Say Winnie Lurk libraries oftentimes will loan, and they will loan for free. When you go to libraries outside of your system, it's going to take longer. Like a public library system might request from its own branches, right? Before it requests from a local college library. I make that comparison because oftentimes public libraries run out of those most popular titles, or titles that maybe are more academic. Local college libraries and universities often will have popular material that might just be sitting on its shelf waiting to be read. So you could, as a public library, request from a local college library and reverse. So that if you're a college library and you want something that's really popular, or more public library oriented, you can request it from that public library. So your returnables, right? Books from regional libraries arrive faster with our affiliations. So again, request them from the closest libraries possible. There should be a general rule that you tell your patrons of your average turnaround time for both books, your returnables, as well as your audio visual, if you get that. Okay, we have another chat question. Is the one chapter per e-text, regardless of the size of the book? The old rule was 10% of a paper book you could photocopy and send out. This one chapter for e-text is going to, you can do one chapter. I've not read about a limit per size of the book. If it's one chapter, you probably could safely assume it's going to be 10% or less of the book. So I hope that answers your question. It should be per e-text, one chapter. Now there are restrictions sometimes with, maybe they'll say in an ebook you can only download 40 pages and your chapter is 55. So then what do you do, right? What do? You make an executive decision. If it's a clerk who experiences that, the clerk should be trained to know what kinds of questions need a librarian's intervention with. So, and it's case by case, I think. Okay. Oh yeah, rare, valuable, oversized item. Sometimes an oversized item you don't have an envelope for. Maybe you can find a book big enough. Maybe you just say, you know what, this oversized item is not leaving my collection. Other times, maybe it's a valuable set. Maybe it's a 4-volume and they want all 4 volumes and you don't want to let all 4 volumes go. There's shipping costs and things go by weight oftentimes. The AV materials, it depends on your library. I never thought it would be fair to circulate an AV like a DVD or a CD to my home patron for 7 days because that's our rule. How do we get that 7-day to another school, right? We can't really send out an AV material to another school and say it's due back in 7 days. Now, maybe you could increase the circulation date for all AV material to a month. You could do that. Other libraries are liberal in those ways. So things to think about. Okay, we talked about conditional requests and so forth. Okay, non-returnables, okay. Non-returnables can be ordered from anywhere. And as I mentioned, if you're on the East Coast and you want something to come really quickly, you can go to a West Coast library and maybe get it that same night. That's really impressive. Students, this is a good tip. Students, good satisfaction with them. They might request an article because they just couldn't find it in our catalog or our own resources, and they place the request. The request comes in and you own it. You can send it out in 5 seconds back to that patron and totally thrill them, and they will think we are the best thing ever. Now, some libraries will instead, and I'm guilty of this myself, instead of filling it, they will, what am I trying to say? Well, remember that all article requests are placed in a string, right? And if the first lender can't fill it, it goes to the next. So I asked the library who has the print copy to send an e-copy before I ask an e-holder or an e-copy. Sounds a little counterintuitive, right? But if I ask for the print copy, and I know that they have the print copy because OCLC says that they have the print copy, more librarians are going to go, oh, okay, I'm going to go photocopy that and send it to the library, either through Iliad or PASA again, or maybe through email. You can do that. If there is an embargo on an electronic journal, it's probably embargoed everywhere. It's embargoed for one, it's often embargoed for all. Now, when it's embargoed for one library, that is why I asked for the print copy, because they can't send out that embargoed information to you. They can't access that embargoed information to you. Now, here's a really important point of reference, if you can all remember this, okay? You can go to the publisher, make a deal with them to eliminate your embargoes. So that's to say, you go to Sage and say, Sage, what package can you offer me? I can't deal with the embargoes. Now, why does that matter, the embargo? Think about a medical library where they have to find articles written in the last 5 years in order to conduct the best research possible for medical tests and treatments. They need the last 5 years of information, and the last year of information may be completely embargoed. The last 3 years of information can be completely embargoed. So if it's embargoed for one, it's embargoed for all, but with that caveat that sometimes you can get that information straight from the publisher. There's price differentials there, but really that could be something that your library decides to do if it's going to be fitting within your patron base. Are there any questions about like the embargo and the e-holder and the e-copy? It's kind of a lot to grasp. But again, I might go to a library as the print copy instead of the e-copy. Now, sometimes you only find e-copies nowadays because we've all weeded everything out. We weed out our journal collection because we don't have room for it. We don't use it, and that's not accurate because other libraries might need it. And we're not just suppliers to our home patrons. We are suppliers to other libraries nationwide. And without that sharing agreement between our other libraries nationwide, Interlibrary alone could fall apart. If we continue to allow these embargoes by the vendors, like who am I thinking? The vendor, not the publisher, the publishing house, but the vendor. We need to just be aware that if my library gets rid of all of the American Journal of Dietetic Association, then nobody can borrow it from us anymore. If we get rid of it and another library gets rid of it in the Western New York area, for example, now who do I go to? Now I have to go to a library that might be outside the region, and it might take a little bit longer. I might make a mistake. Maybe they don't have print, maybe they only have e-copy, and then they say no because of the embargo. Well, we can't allow for embargoes anymore. We, as a profession, really need to step up to the plate and say, hey, you know, we're not going to just take this sitting down lightly. Embargoes, thank you for asking that question. An embargo is a period that the publisher puts on our electronic holdings that says you cannot have full text for 1 year. You cannot have full text for 2 years. You can see what's available. You can want what's available, but you can't get it through your own resources. So what that embargo period does is prevents access to shareable information. So I guess when you say it's not shareable, it's really not shareable to anybody. But again, if you go to the publishers, maybe you can strike deals with Elsevier, maybe you can strike a deal with Sage. If you have more popular publishers, when I talk about some of these embargoes, and it speaks sometimes to special libraries. I know public libraries are different in the kinds of information that they are requesting for their patrons. Any other questions? Specifically about embargoes? Any comments in the chat? Okay. I love this. Absolutely love the U.S. Library of Congress. This is the report of the Librarian of Congress for the fiscal year ending 1907. But that, hope it opens up. And this is pretty cool stuff. And let me just apologize. I got it. Okay, this is the report of the Librarian of Congress, again from 1907. And they talk about interlibrary loan, and it says here the principles governing the operation of interlibrary loan are described in the following memorandum, which was set forth as a circular at the inception of the system. The purpose is to advance the boundaries of knowledge. It says the material cannot include, therefore, books that should be in a local library or can be borrowed from a library. When interlibrary loan was first established, it was for serious researchers only. And think about that. Only serious researchers, scholars could use it. You had to have that kind of an affiliation. So with that, let's go down a little bit more. And it says down below, a library in borrowing a book is understood to hold itself responsible to return the book at the expiration of 10 days from its receipt. So that's what they did in the beginning. An extension of the period can be granted when feasible. But again, this really was intended to serve scholars and other university professors, people along those lines, researchers. And this is where it had all began. Actually, a little bit sooner than this, the dialogue had begun. So that's the report of the Library of Congress. I'm trying to see what else I might want to point out to you. Okay, that's about it for interlibrary loan. That's just the one section up at the top. And I'd like to point out these documents are very hard to find. Very hard to find because of their age. We all know there's places we can go to get information that is old and hard to find in free text formats using a number of different kinds of search engines, like HathiTrust is one. Not everything in HathiTrust is available full text, but you can find this kind of information on the internet doing basic searches. Okay, let's go back to our. Okay. The loan is, in theory, a special service to scholarship, which is what comes from the document that we just read. It is not within the power or duty of the local library to render. Okay, so it's special service. The purpose is to aid research calculated to advance the boundaries of knowledge by the loan of unusual books not readily available elsewhere. So back in the day, you used what was available, unless you were a scholar. And how did you even know what else was available? You go to the library, get the assistance from the librarian, and that's where the bibliographic sharing becomes important. So in 1917, ILL became more of an official entity. So you got the 1907 when it first was introduced. 1917, it was adopted by the ALA Russa, And they really wanted to define its purpose and scope for interlibrary loan. This 1917 document went on to be revised in 1940 and then in 1952, according to Reynolds, who wrote about this in 1964. So one thing I wanted everyone to do, and we probably shouldn't do it in class because then it includes logging into or going to a browser, but let's all find the Interlibrary Loan Code of 1940. And we're going to send out a little reminder of that so that you can find that, you can read that between now and the time of our next session. We'll send a reminder out about that. And it's interesting the ways that you can go about finding this old information. And this speaks to your skill set as a interlibrary loan librarian and detective, right? A lot of this is detective work. Let's talk a little bit further back about the 5 laws of library science. And I don't know how many of us remember this from library school, but the 5 laws of library science was a theory proposed by Ranganathan, and he detailed the principles of operating a library system. He conceived the 5 laws in 1924. And they are a set of norms and guidelines of good practice in librarianship. And I bring this up because I love it, and that's why. Here are the laws, and I do have guides there for you, web links you could take a look at. The 5 laws are: books are for use. Every reader for their book. Every book has a reader. Save time for the reader. And then the library is a growing organism. Books are for use is my most favorite law. Books are for use, right? We don't buy them to keep them in our shelves, and we shouldn't be buying them only to lend to our own patrons, okay? We're buying books to circulate to the greater masses. And we have to think of it that way. I know so many libraries, so many, who will not circulate a new book for 6 months to a year, saving it for their home patrons. Now, if somebody wants that book, we should lend that book. If somebody comes in and wants that book that we lent out through interlibrary loan, we request it through interlibrary loan and we get a copy from another place. It's all we have to do. Follow the law of library science. This man was brilliant. So circulate that book. Books are for use, even in interlibrary loan. So if we have every reader their book, how do we find books for readers? Don't make them find their own. Help them. Help those librarians. Every book has its reader. I use an example of my own bizarre reading tastes. Notes from the Dead House by Dostoevsky might not be for everyone, but it sure was for me. And I found it in my library. Why was that ordered? I don't know. We don't really study Dostoevsky on campus. But I scooped that book up real fast and tried to read as much as I could. But Dostoevsky, as we all might know, has 5,000 characters in every book he writes, unless it's Crime and Punishment. But in any event, there are books that we should keep in our libraries. We should keep them. They're classics. They're going to be requested. And we can lend them to other libraries. The first thing that I asked for when I started at Duval was to have a tattered old copy of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. Why? It's classic. We need to have it. We need to have a copy that's in good condition. So just like I would ask for a Dostoevsky novel like Crime and Punishment, if it's tattered, I'm going to ask for a new copy of that too, because We need to be able to share these resources with other people. Our students might want them, our patrons might want them, maybe our patrons have been asking for them. So every book has its reader. Save time for the reader, no wild goose chases. Okay. And the library, number 5, is a growing organism. So we need to really determine our fate, and redefine our profession and our libraries, also known as memory institutions. Should we take a break? Quick break.
Good idea.
Let's take a break, and then we can come back and talk about those 5 laws of interlibrary loan. That sounds like a good place to break. And while we're on break, fill up that chat box if you want. Thank you. How about we take 5 minutes? 5 to 7. Stop video.
Maybe stop sharing at the country pause important. And Deb, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Can we see the slide that says contextually? I'll make sure my slides opened up properly. Okay. So how do these 5 laws? I'm sorry.
I can't see them.
Okay, let me reshare.
I can see them now.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So how do these 5 laws that we've just talked about affect interlibrary loan, or maybe our perceptions of interlibrary loan? Because if books are for use and anyone who wants the book should have opportunity to read it. Why do we keep it on our own shelves, hoping or thinking that an interesting reader from our own library might want it? Good circulation statistics are good circulation statistics. And if we're circulating that book through interlibrary loan, it's a circulation statistic. And these statistics prove we spend money wisely and that our services are used and useful. So again, books are for use. I know libraries all around the country weed out older books so that they can make room for new books. And this discussion and a change that we could consider. I've heard libraries discard everything older than 3 years. And I'm concerned that we're throwing away our institutional memory into trash bins. And I know why we're doing it. I know that we want more computers. I know we want to have a larger e-footprint. But we are memory institutions. And by throwing things out, we might be discarding something that really will be profound and perhaps wanted in the future. So are there any comments on how these laws affect interlibrary loan, or any comments on our perceptions of how these 5 laws maybe have enlightened us or caused us to have new thoughts? Yep, weeding last copies. And who's tracking that? Who actually says, okay, we're going to weed all of the American Journal of the American Dietetics Association. But what if everybody else is doing it too? What if we're weeding out all of our Cosmopolitan magazines? And I'll tell you, they're really hard to find articles from. And I recently did some research, and I actually needed to use articles from Cosmopolitan from the 70s and the 80s. And it's not easy unless you have the right databases. So if we're throwing out all those magazines, then we don't know that this most recent author of a book called Subversion actually was denouncing everything she wrote in Cosmopolitan magazine when she was a freelancer. And that was a concern to me because I said, well, why would she denounce it? And what did she write about in Cosmopolitan magazine? And I did my research and I found out her articles were on interviewing, they were on date rape, they were on topics of historical concern to us. What were women thinking back then in a popular sense? Okay, I see a chat. Yeah. Okay, that's a good comment. We do own our print. We do. We own it. We buy it and we own it. But our electronic resources, right? They can be leases. Books, electronic books are often leases. After a patron clicks on it 3 times, oh, we bought it, now we own it. When in fact, those 3 clicks might have been mistakes. Or that click was a librarian who was doing a research study, or who was helping a patron, and the patron said, no, I don't want that. Well, we clicked on it, we opened it, now we own it. It's a great comment. That's a great comment. Anybody have anything to add about that? Well, if you do, just add it in there. Policies and procedures. I just put down 2 links to policies and procedures from Merriam-Webster.com, fine resource to go to, right? Just a dictionary definition of the 2, because there is a distinct difference. Not only policies, which is how you do things, right? Or I'm sorry, your policies are the rules and regulations of the service. Policies are internal, policies are external to our customers. Procedures are also external to our customers, but mostly are related to our internal operations. So we get the request, right? Maybe we print the request. Maybe we take the request up to the shelf, and maybe we look in the shelf, we find the book, and then we take the book back downstairs. That's the procedure, right? That's our procedure, internal procedure. So policies are the rules we set up for patrons to follow. Books must be returned by its due date, and renewal should be requested 7 days in advance, right? Those are some policies that we set up for our patrons. Now, are there any comments about this in relation to the 5 laws? Books are for use, right? Every book is patron, so these are external patron policies. Oh, I see a chat. What do we have here? Oh, Vermont State Colleges. I think I read about that. They're getting rid of their physical libraries completely. It is so incredibly sad to me. It is so incredibly the wave of the future if we do not step in. Because now, if there is no physical library, there are no books, right? We can't lend anything. There are no physical libraries, right? It's a terrible thing. I know. Erie County is free, and for non-new, let's see, Erie County Public Libraries, we are fine free, excellent, right? And for non-new books, they are doing weeks or automatically renewed and can be renewed up to 3 times. And you'll see as we're going through this chat box, we're going through the presentation, not every library is the same, and not every library should be the same. We all need to understand our individual patrons and what they need, and then come up with those policies and procedures. Okay, so this is just an sample. How do I participate? You have to be registered, right? No fines, no overdue books, right? How do you police that? That's a good question, right? You gotta police every single request that you get and make sure there's everything overdue. Some libraries can do it, some libraries don't do it. If a library patron has an overdue book or an overdue fine, am I not going to get them their journal article or their research article? And I just thought of a little story. For each patron is their book, right? Each patron wants their book. I came from an academic library, and in that academic library, I had a student come in over the winter break, and they wanted several Harlequin romance novels, right? I'm an academic librarian. I don't know why they're coming in. They request all these. I had to get them all through interlibrary loan. They all came in as paperbacks. I went to all public libraries to get them. And I never asked the patron why they were looking for Harlequin romance novels. Maybe she just wanted to read them. And why would I say no to that? Although interlibrary loan was initiated and created for scholars, it has morphed through the years, and we do make requests for everything we can get for our patrons. Then there's information on how to contact the librarian, what kinds of materials are available at this particular library. Now, they're not all the same. We had test files and videos, DVDs. They're often difficult to obtain. We just wanted our patrons to know about that. If a patron comes up and they say, I want a copy of this book, and you're suspicious, look it up with OCLC. See how many libraries nationwide own it. And then to have a conversation with your patron about, oh, do you want us to try? Only 100 libraries have it. We can try for you. It might take longer for you, but we will do it in any event. So those are just some examples. Oh, and the big question is textbooks, right? You're an academic institution, and the students always want to use ILL for textbooks. I know libraries that will verify that that book request is not on the textbook list in their institution, which to me is making a judgment call on a request that a patron has made. Do you tell the patron, no, we're not going to do this because it's a textbook? And then end it at that because you checked the list. Do you request a textbook anyway and explain the policy and the procedure to them? Because textbooks take a long time to arrive, and textbooks sometimes are not renewable. Thank you for sharing that, Caitlin. Okay. And then at the bottom of the screen there, it talks about how long your turnaround time generally is. Journal articles can be available in seconds, literally in seconds. You find it on Google Scholar and bam, there it is. And then the patron has it in seconds, and then they think we're awesome. This is your sample copyright statement. Again, just a sample, but it should be somewhere on your ILL page. It should be somewhere where it's easy for them to see so they know what the rules and regulations are. We don't police patrons once they leave with that book. They want to photocopy that whole entire book and we don't know about it. We don't know about it. And we can't control what they're going to do. Maybe they take that interlibrary loan journal article or magazine article and photocopy it 50 times. We don't know about it. We don't know about it. Okay, We talked about the policies for our patrons. Let's talk about the staff procedures, and this is what we do internally. Okay, here's a good example. We search Google Scholar for full text as the first step of the process in asking for a journal or magazine article. Now, the magazine articles might not be in Google Scholar, depends on what kind of magazine it is, but it might be available through a general Google search, in which case, if I couldn't find it in Scholar, I would definitely then go and check in Google because it only takes a couple of seconds. This is a great way for staff to verify incomplete citations, right? Patron says, oh, I know the name of the journal article, and I know the name of the author, but that's all I know. And you need everything else in order to tell the library what you're looking for. Do you place requests for textbooks? Do you limit patrons to a total number of articles per day or per semester or per year? Libraries will sometimes say you only get 30 per semester, and they have to track it. And why are you putting a limitation on it anyway? Okay, there are abusive patrons. We all know some patrons do abuse it and just request every single thing that they find on their topic. But that's not a commonality, and that's a one-on-one, case-by-case basis. Other libraries will limit the number per day as a workflow issue, because if you have a very active interlibrary loan department and somebody puts in 20 requests, well, you know, you can really only do 5 of them per day and then move on to the next patron. It's not fair to do all 20 for one patron and make everybody else wait. And besides, there's no patron out there in the world who's going to read 20 articles all at one time. And you can read the rest of them. But at the bottom, it says no two ILL departments are identical. And I've said that so many times. Maybe you have to charge patron fines because that's how you fund your ILL program. So maybe you do charge patrons fines when the ILL books are returned late. Okay, this is the suggestion of 5, the rule of Cantu. And some of us might be familiar with this, but you are allowed as a library, the guideline is to request only up to 5 articles published in the same journal within the last 5 years. Okay, now let's give you an example. Say there is a library that has the American Journal of Dietetics or something along those lines. And our patron wants 10 articles published from that journal in the last 5 years because it's a medical school and they have to find the most recent information, right? If they only can request up to 5, then what do we do with the other 5 that they need, right? You can lawfully obtain 6 or more articles from a journal if you then subscribe to the journal. It's one way. You can pay royalties to the Copyright Clearinghouse, and then automatically through your management client system, Iliad, PASA, Dockline, whatever you use. Now, you can also, instead of paying royalties to the Copyright Clearinghouse, I don't like this option, but you could send library patrons to the closest subscribing library. They can make their own copy. I don't like that option. And I don't like the option of denying the request. Don't like that option either. So I think paying the royalties is probably going to be best, unless you do think that there's a general need for the journal in your collection. You could automatically pay royalties through the Iliad client, for example, and they will, at the end of the year, give you a huge bill. Okay, so we've got guidelines that, oh, that's the same slide. I must not have advanced. There we go. We talked about licensing, right? And we talked about people who want to lend from their electronic collection. This is a sample of a contract from ProQuest. And it is a section in there specifically for interlibrary loan. where it's allowed, it says, provided that the loan is not done in a manner or magnitude that would replace the recipient's library's own subscription. Okay, so we can't loan so much that they're like, well, you know, you should just have the subscription. This is something we can negotiate. We can negotiate our contracts. We can negotiate our contracts. Keep telling yourself that. Read your contracts. Go back to the vendor and say, I can no longer accept this. We can't not lend things that are coming from electronic resources. More and more things are becoming electronic. Therefore, more and more things are unavailable if we don't renegotiate our contracts. We're going to talk about controlled digital lending in our next class more in depth. It's complicated. It's not exactly new, but it is on the newer end of our addressing the 20th century problem. Older books might still be under copyright. It's life of the author plus 50 years. But it's unlikely ever to be offered digitally by, you know, what Google Books or Hathi Trust, for example. 20th century problem, right? So there's the memory again. There's the memory. Book is gone. We've weeded them out. Book is gone. And that older book is not going to be in copyright. It's not going to be offered digitally. Maybe it's a book about a local woman who had accident as a young child and a swimming pool accident and was paralyzed the rest of her life. She is, in fact, a real person who does live locally. Her book was weeded and now no libraries own it to understand her trials and tribulations and her successes. Through CDL, libraries use technical controls to ensure, this is really strange, owned to loaned ratio. So the library can circulate only the exact number of copies that it owns, regardless of format, okay? Step in the right direction. My answer to this problem is simple. When you want to loan an electronic book, you give the electronic book to the patron via email link or to the library, I'm sorry. When you're lending out an ebook to another library, give them a passcode. You want to get into this electronic book? Here's your passcode. Get into the electronic book, passcode expires in 30 days and gone. No more access to that book. And the book never leaves your library. That's my simple solution. Management systems. I think, let me just check really quickly. Okay. Management systems provide faster service to your patrons where you can streamline your workflows and automate processing. And again, track copyright in the rule of 5. So why not? Well, why not is cost. Iliad and Tapasa, I was telling Caitlin before we started, I wanted to move to Tapasa from Iliad, and the people at Iliad, CLC, sent me an quote, emailed me a quote. We were spending an obscene $10,000 a year in Iliad, obscene. And then when we considered moving to Tapasa, my quote was $700 more. And I didn't understand why. And when I asked for their algorithm, I asked for their pricing structure and their model, they gave me the runaround and they actually never provided it. But I'm like, if this is now a web-based service, why is this costing me $700 more? Are you charging me per transactions? Does it fall into the number of students that go to school? How many members we have in our community? Negotiate. COVID, right? In COVID, we learned to be flexible, innovative, and we learned to be patron-centric. So we developed models of a locker system for books. Maybe if you're in the library alone, we have lockers now in the lobby of the library that's open 24/7. They can come in, we give them a code, and they get their book on their own, and that alleviates the whole step of the process. I mean, giving them better service too. I did provide to you some COVID readings, and you'll see they're all current 2020, 2020, 20. One of them's old, 2014. But 2020. So these are all current articles on what the COVID-19 crisis did to our operations. I think we're returning to more normal, but the normal is a little bit new because we had to make adjustments. But I recommend any one of these articles if you're more in tune with the COVID impact on your organization. So I'm going to finish up by Bopp and Smith, which we might all remember from grad school. Bopp and Smith, Reference and Information Services. This is the 4th edition. But they say a researcher may not be able to enter a particular library because of lack of affiliation. But the library user may still obtain a loan from a collection via ILL, whether that library is nearby or thousands of miles away. So we have to be creative. And we really have to think about the future of our profession and the future of interlibrary loan as a service. It's critical that we don't let other people make these decisions for us, like publishers. We really need to, join together and say, hey, and this is something we can do as a consortium. We can do a nationwide consortium. We can go through ALA. We can go through RUSA. We need to go through somebody. We need to have something that's going to change the wave of our future. I see it chat. I know we have to wrap up in a minute. Okay, there's the evaluation for today's session. Oh, and if you could, what would be really helpful to me? Really helpful is if in the meantime, between this session and the next session, you provide either me or Caitlin some feedback about what you want to learn more about in the next session. We will be doing CDL. I'll be going into that in detail. Electronic sharing, a whole slew of different topics that I think you're going to be interested in that I just possibly couldn't cover in 2 hours. Are there any questions? Okay, let's just talk very quickly. Oh, it said here, exercise due before the next session, which actually is in 2 weeks, but try to find those resources, right? See if you can find the 1952 General Interlibrary Loan Code. The 1940s tough. Anybody can find that? You got to tell me, because I did it one time and I don't remember how I did it. But let's do that and let's talk about it. Caitlin provided to you a presentation file for Google Scholar. Okay, if you've not done Google Scholar, preferences, because what Google Scholar can do is it can read your actual library holdings once you set that up with them. And then you'll know automatically whether or not your library owns it or if you can find it free online. So take a look at that. That's very important information. If you have that Google Scholar preferences set up, you can look for the 1952 and the 1940 General Interlibrary Loan Codes. But as a tip, you might want to also check in regular Google. So that concludes my presentation, and we do have maybe a minute or two for a comment or a question. And you have my contact information there if you'd like that too. Anything for the chat?
I haven't seen anything. Just want to remind people to fill out the evaluation. I put a link to it in the chat. Also, I added some more questions to the Padlet, so feel free to check that out, and we can reconvene next week.
Yes, the Padlet that Caitlin is referring to, I looked at and I made a lot of comments. Signed my name off so that you knew it was me. Thank you, everyone. I can let you go now unless anybody else has a quick question or comment.
I want to thank everyone for coming and was. I don't see
Thank you,
anyone
everyone.
in, but thank you all.